Welcome to Stuff They Didn't Teach Me in Sunday School. Now, if you're following along at home in the order of things, you probably expect that I'm going to take 1 Timothy next, and you would be absolutely wrong. I'm going to skip 1 and 2 Timothy. I'm going to go do Titus, and then Philemon, and then 1 and 2 Timothy. Why? 2 Timothy is almost without a doubt the very last letter that Paul wrote before he died. And so we want to hang on to that one till last. There are 4 personal letters that Paul wrote. You're reading somebody else's mail. When you read Timothy and Titus and Philemon, you're reading Paul's mail to individuals. We have these 4 personal letters of Paul. 3 of them we categorize as pastorals, even though the word pastor isn't used in 1 and 2 Timothy or Titus. These are letters written to leaders within the church, and we've categorized them as pastoral letters. Titus is a man who did some traveling with the Apostle Paul. He was on some of his missionary journeys. He had been, at this point, was apparently kind of overseer over the churches at Crete, because in verse 5 of chapter 1 of Titus, Paul sends him back to Crete to appoint what was lacking, to appoint elders in those churches or leaders in those churches, possibly pastors in those churches. Much of his encouragement to Titus has to do with how the church functions and how Titus ought to be in a leadership role in those churches. Chapter 2, he addresses various categories of people and how Titus should work with them in the congregations, with older men, older women, younger men in verse 6. He includes slaves in verse 9. And then verse 11, he has some interesting lines. He says, "For the grace of God has appeared for the salvation of all men, training us to renounce irreligion and worldly passions, and to live sober, upright, and godly lives in this world, awaiting our blessed hope, the appearing of the glory of the great God and Savior, Jesus Christ." So awaiting, he wants a church that's waiting. But now if you look at the next line, "who gave himself for us to redeem us from all iniquity and to purify for himself a people of his own who are zealous for good deeds." So Paul's instruction to Titus is you need to be preparing a church that is waiting the second coming of Christ, but is also active and zealous and engaged in the service that God called it to do. Very, very similar to the message he gives to those who had quit working and sitting around waiting for the second coming back in 2 Thessalonians. The rest of the book follows with some duties for Christians throughout churches that he oversees. And then at the end of the letter, some advice to him. And if you go to verse 8, he says, of chapter 3, he says, "The saying is sure. I desire you to insist on these things so that those who believed in God may be careful to apply themselves to good deeds that are excellent and profitable to men. But avoid stupid controversies." I love that line. Don't get involved in stupid controversies. "Genealogies, dissensions, and quarrels over law, for they are unprofitable and futile." That would be good words for the church today as well. Avoid stupid controversies. "As for a man who is factious, after admonishing him once or twice, have nothing more to do with him, knowing that such a person is perverted and sinful, and he's self-condemned." So if you've got this guy that's just causing problems in your church all the time, Paul says, and just trying to divide the church all the time, have nothing to do with him. He's useless. He's not helping the church grow. And then some final words to Titus. "When I send Artemas or Tychicus to you, do your best to come to me at Nicopolis, for I have decided to spend the winter there." And you get the flavor of this personal letter to a close personal friend. So do your best to speed Zenas the lawyer and Apollos on their way, see that they lack nothing, and let our people learn to apply themselves to good deeds so as to help cases of urgent need and not to be unfruitful. And one last encouragement to Titus: tell your people to be useful people. Tell them to be engaged and involved in the ministry that God calls them to be involved in. And then finally, Paul says, "All who are with me send greetings to you. Greet those who love us in the faith. Grace be with you all." And Paul concludes his letter to a pastor, an overseer of the church in Crete, Titus.